very much for the introduction. Just for clarification, I'm here on behalf of the German Environment Agency, which is coordinating that project. And together with me here, even in a different role, is my co-coordinator Detlef to my left-hand side. So he will also be around with you this evening. So for taking the last words first, so for any questions that will be coming up and cannot be answered during our talks, Detlef will be around here for answering them. So inspiration is not actually dealing with the question, how do we get to the integrated land use questions, but indeed we are dealing with questions of integrated land use issues and the integration and the land and the management. So we are putting question marks behind all of these buzzwords and ask ourselves what is the research that is needed to expand our knowledge that we have about that. And what of that research is actually needed from the point of view of the different stakeholders in Europe that are concerned with these issues. And we want to know that in order to come up with a strategic research agenda, with an agenda that should guide in the future, so it should be strategic. Imagine a time frame of maybe 5 to 10 years from now, of projects that should be implemented in that time and then should come up with the answers to that important questions and to the strategic questions. If I say we, give you a little bit of the background who that project is that is elaborating on that strategic research agenda in the first place. So inspiration is the acronym for Integrated Spatial Planning, Land Use and Soil Management Research Action, and it's funded under Horizon 25, as was said already. And we are including at the moment 17 partners in the project consortium and have been involving also further countries in our data collection. And I will give you more details on this just in a minute. As I said, coordinated by German Environment Agency, and I think most important here for the moment is the last line referring to the duration. And you can see we started in March 2015 and are now a bit more than halfway of the process to come to this research agenda. As I said, this should be our final product, a research agenda for Europe, a research agenda looking at land use changes, and soil management, or at the compartments of soil, sediments, and groundwater. And this research agenda, it should be not one that is driven only by what scientists or researchers think are gaps in knowledge, but it should be driven to consider the current and future societal challenges. So these identified either by the Commission and the Horizon 2020 program, one of them being the societal challenge number 5, under which also the project is funded. I just printed it small on the ground to give that example. So growing a low carbon, resource efficient economy with sustainable supply of raw materials is one of the challenges, but you can add to that. And as I will show you, we have asked the stakeholders of that research agenda that we are to develop to give their view on what they regard as their societal challenges to which they want the answers from future research projects. Because, and that is the next most important line also in my presentation, and I'm trying to give you in this presentation more the background to the project instead of the final results already, is that we have chosen an approach that is a bottom-up approach in the true sense. That is, in order to understand the demands for research, we wanted to go to the stakeholders of a strategic research agenda and to ask them what should be in that agenda in order to satisfy your demands regarding the closing of knowledge needs. But on a second pillar, or in a second step, we also want to use this project to initiate a transnational network, in particular of funders that are willing to implement this research agenda, or being very pragmatic at this stage already, not the entire agenda, but parts of that, in particular those parts that they feel are of interest to them. So I'm coming back to my statement that we are now about halfway, and this graph should illustrate that. And I will zoom into the different stages to give you a better feeling about what we have been doing so far and what you can expect over the remaining time. So the project started, as was mentioned in a side note also by Rachel already, by us talking with stakeholders in the 17 countries involved in the network, and also inviting further countries that are not directly partners in the network, but also to become engaged in the exchanges. So for each of the countries, as you can see on the right-hand side in the small bullets going into the different funnels, we had in each country a so-called national focal point, as is familiar also with the EEA setting. And this focal point did interviews with stakeholders. And you see examples of the stakeholders on the left in the green capital letters, so with stakeholders from the industry, from the end users of research, so it could be regulators as well, as indicated the industry, but also representatives of cities, of communities, and as a second pillar, stakeholders, the funders of research initiatives, so we ask for their interest. And as a third stakeholder, not to forget them, but just counting them as a third one and always trying to not have their proportion bigger than 1/3 of the community being involved, the scientists. So all the three types of stakeholders, scientists, research funders, and research end users should have been participating on a ratio of 1/3 each. So, as I said, in each of our 17 countries, we had national focal points, and they engaged with these national key stakeholders, as we called them, about 20 to 25 per country. That means we have engaged with more than 500 experts all over Europe in the first half year of the project. And we asked them. It was a bit more complicated than 3 questions, but it's been about 20 questions that we asked to them and took them together in a workshop to get to a first sensitization on what they nationally want regarding 3 questions, which you see indicated on the lower right-hand side. What is the state of the art in your country regarding the knowledge gaps that you have? And based on that, what research and innovation do you need to answer to these knowledge gaps? The second is, give us your experience on what works and on what does not work in relation to land use and land use politics in the science policy interface and the science practice interface. What do you want future research to consider in this regard? And third, tell us about promising funding instruments, or also if you think there are funding instruments out there which do not fulfill their tasks. So we also started collecting already the input to our question, how can we actually in the future implement our research needs? So these are the 3 main bullets, and as a side one, we also did start by looking to what are potential transnational funding schemes. And we have collected all that information and published it in a first publicly available deliverable of more than 1,000 pages. I don't want to say anything about the content by that, but just to give you an idea, a lot of information carrying up there. So what is most important if we want to get to a strategic research agenda that is digestible in the end, which should rather be 20 pages than 1,000 pages, is to digest this information. And to do so in a way that at the end of the process, each stakeholder that has been involved in the beginning still says, yes, I do see still my point in that agenda, and I'm happy to take ownership of what has been written there. So this has been the struggling task that we have been faced with in the last 6 months of the project, and which we are finishing right at the moment, and we have published by the end of the last month, so exactly in the last week, a report that is presenting what we call the cross-thematic topics and the integrated topics, I will explain to you in a minute, that are summarizing these 1,000 pages down now to about 100 pages. And in so doing, it was important to us to keep the bottom-up approach. And I have to emphasize this because we had a lot of discussions with the stakeholders whom we regularly engaged in this process on why did you not choose this systematic approach to structure the information that you want to come up with? Why didn't you use the soil functions approach and did structure the research according to that? Or why didn't you choose to structure them according to the hierarchy or to the system of director generals in the commission? Because then it would have been much easier to address the policymakers about that. So we tried to be serious with our bottom-up idea and did not do that, but we followed a conceptual model that we had in mind already when proposing the project. And this one is indicated on the bottom left side, and I'm screening it to give you an idea of it, and you will see it's quite simple. So we were assuming there is coming this big cloud of national research demands, which at the first glance is difficult to cluster. But we said, okay, let's take 4 perspectives under which we look into this cloud to get some clarity from it. And the first perspective is asking, or is taking a demand side, and it is asking what are the resources that we as society need to satisfy our needs, the resources that are provided by the soil sediment water system. In any research related to the question, how do we most efficiently or effectively exploit these demand or these resources to satisfy our demand, are linked to this first perspective. The second perspective is like flipping this coin to the supply side and asking what is the soil sediment water system able to supply us with. So here we are asking for the limits or for the potential of the soil sediment water system to supply, in a more business term, the natural capital that we try to use. Whereas these 2 dimensions are, you could say, very close also to basic scientific questions on also a systems perspective, how are things interrelated, to which degree can we exploit them. The third perspective of the management or the land management area is taking us to the point where the decisions are taken. And the question, how do we come to balancing the demand and supply? How can we achieve efficiently decisions with respecting that there are restrictions in the day-to-day decision making, that there are limits in resources and in time under which that they are constraining our decision making. And respecting these constraints, still, how can we get the best decision-making implemented in the cities, communities, and on the farms, in the forests, that help us to achieve good land management. And as we know that as a result, on even however good we try that, there will be something that we cannot take into account in this regard, as there will be impacts and external effects, externalities that cannot be considered in this regard. We have this fourth perspective to have the opportunity to think about what our research needs regarded to better understanding those externalities, or in other terms, the net impacts that our decisions have on a global, regional, and local scale. So these are the 4 perspectives, or the themes, if I'm referring to them in the following. And we approached to have the look into this cloud of national research questions by asking for each of those themes, which you can see here stylized in the columns of the table, and for the individual questions that we received for the countries. Are these country questions having a link to the theme? That was the very first simple assessment. And we then, as a second step, saw, okay, yes, as here in that case for demand, for Austria and Germany, there might be a link of these 2 questions. They seem to address the same issues, so they could be clustered into one topic. And this cluster could be, or is obviously to be enriched by a third question from the Netherlands asking a similar thing. So these 3 questions, for example, then made up the first cluster of a research clustered thematic topic under this headline. No, so also I lost the screen. Let's say there. I think I can.
No, it's frozen. You have to look.
Okay, it's frozen. Thanks. So we repeated that exercise also for the other topics, and by that result came for each topic up with the clustered thematic topics. But of course we have been aware that only taking these topics is not enough, because there are links between the topics, and that is also something we have been repeatedly instructed or advised by our stakeholders with whom we have engaged and discussed the topics. So the stakeholders told us, think about the links between the topics and also consider our questions that have been broader than the topics you are addressing. For example, questions like, what about efficient strategy related to monitoring that are needed to collect the data that you need to answer your demand question in as much as your supply questions. So such a monitoring topic we would regard to as an integrated research topic in this regard. And so we, in addition to the clustered topic, did look which connections are existing between the themes and between broader questions coming from the national reports, and we term them as integrated research topics. So these are the two different types of approaches we use to structure the information. And as you can see, they, even though they come here quite artificial, but our main idea behind that is to not use any established scientific disciplinary approach or established political approach or established lobby stakeholder approach, but to have that bottom-up approach before then going back to a clustering that is more to the implementation orientation of the results. So now in the middle you see again the conceptual model. And around that you see indicated the number of research questions which we identified from the national reports, so about 1,100 in total, and how they were rated as relevant for the different themes. And you see behind the small arrow the number of clustered topics that we have as a result identified. So for the demand side, we have identified 7 thematic topics that reflect the demand side, as well as 7 for the natural capital, 4 for the land management within total, so the 4 plus 3 subtopics, in total 7 subtopics, and for the net impacts also 4 main topics there. And 17 integrated research themes. And I, of course, have not the time to present you all the details about them, but I would like to show you 2 or 3 of them to give you a feeling on the level of detail to which we did the summary or bringing them together. So I see that I have to...
Again, the screen?
No, the screen is fine. I see that the presentation is not the one that we placed there, but it's okay. It's the one from yesterday, so it's okay. So you will only get 2 examples for that reason. And the first slide is showing you that although we are or have been chosen this bottom-up approach, what we have seen as a result, surprisingly you would say, is actually a mirroring of the identified cluster topics between the demand and supply side. I'm not sure if you can read that, but there are on the demand side as well as on the supply side issues related, for example, to our demand for clean water, for water retention options as well. So that is what society demands. And on the other hand side, there have been research questions popping up that ask, we need a better understanding on how actually soil is providing that capacity of water filtering, on how we can ensure that natural capital without reaching a tipping point of the provision of that ecosystem service. And you see that similarity also regarding geological resources or subsurface resources, as told on the demand side, or in a more general sense related to society's request for food fiber and fuels as something we have been speaking a lot about today, on the other side being closely related to the available quantity and in particular quality of soils. And research questions in this natural capital 1 are, for example, related to the question, how well do we actually understand the soil system, the linkage between the soil functions, something that has been shown by Rachel as well in the approach to understand the different drivers of or determinants of soil functions and their interrelation. So what is really behind that? Their research needs have been expressed. For another example, let me go into the land management category, and in this one in particular, but also in general, we have been informed by our stakeholders that there is much where the typical scientist would say, I'm not sure if that is really a scientific question. Or I'm not sure if that is really innovative research you ask me for. Many of the stakeholders whom we asked, what do you need, told us, well, I need something to make my decisions more sustainable. And I would need this information, or I would need information on the land management limit, on how we can reflect this or that connection. And then the scientist would say, yeah, we know about that. It's written, I don't know where. It's the project 5 years ago having had this result. But we are told by many stakeholders from many countries that this information is not at their disposal. It's not at their hands available in order to use it. And many of the questions in the land management area are related to such approaches or to this arena. More precisely for the cluster thematic topic 1 in the land management, this is related not only to the availability of such information, but also on the availability of instruments and policy tools that have been suggested to enable a better land management. Because also there much research has been done, but nevertheless there's also a need to provide further information being expressed from the stakeholders. So here issues related to the better use of the existing instruments has been put forward, and as a challenge it has been seen that there is that diversity of administrative and planning systems between the member states as a challenge, but also as an opportunity for learning transborderly. So I think we also have to emphasize that. And then to demonstrate to you then what is behind always such a cluster thematic topic, there is first of all a description, for example here for the spatial planning dimension, that is further describing that it is, for example, dealing with the spatial relationships between societal needs and so forth. You can read that and you will be familiar most likely with that approach, and this is rather to inform what it is about, and then highlighting what is the societal challenges being addressed by doing research in that field. And then what we are adding to that are the country questions that have been clustered under these themes. So just to give you 2 examples for questions under that spatial planning highlighted here from Finland, for example, the question, what is an efficient way that we can better consider the soil and water related ecosystem services in land use planning? That is a research question seen as not answered so far by the Finnish colleagues, or on the German level asking for research to identify the optimal levels of implementing certain land use decision instruments. And for each of the different topics you find that. And you also find that for the identified horizontal integrated research topics. For example, here another one, and I selected that one as maybe challenging also for the EEA perspective on it, which is asking for the link between the environmental perspective and the social perspective of the 3 pillars of sustainability. We usually have the bad guy, the economics and the market, but in that regard we sometimes seem to overlook the link or the interrelation and the potential synergies, but also trade-offs between pursuing environmental and societal objectives, which in a city context could be synergistic, as in the concepts of environmental justice, but could be also competing, as when we want to, for example, further the use of renewable energies, which are on the other hand side at the moment more expensive to provide them, and thereby are putting households at risk of poverty, for example. So in this regard, potential research questions which are above the themes of demand and supply, or linking different of themes of them, are, for example, asking how much density is actually possible in our communities by still allowing for enough green and ensuring healthy communities. So it's a demand and supply questions related in there, and the question how we manage that at the points. Also the second question, what are the drivers to implement such change or to come to a governance perspective on that, would be an example for that. And for each of the questions, and you should not go into detail for the tables, is just to illustrate to you that behind each of the tables, again, there is the collection of national questions related to that, and the collection of clustered thematic themes that are related to the questions which are highlighted here as well. So second but last slide is to say how is the process continuing now. So I told you we have identified the topics and the project is still more than 1 year to go. So what do we want to do in the remaining time? So we will use about the next 3 months to come from this 100 pages to the 20 pages. And then we will use the 20 pages and this last year of the project we have to go to the different stakeholders that hopefully take ownership of the research agenda and become willing to implement part of it. So we are looking forward to engage with them and encourage a matchmaking of interested stakeholders and identify with them funding schemes to implement the identified research agenda implementation options. And if you are now interested in further details, I'd like to invite you to visit the Inspiration website where these reports are publicly available. Of course, you can also contact me or Gertrui, who has been on the advisory board on the project and gave helpful advice to find more details on this. At the moment, we are actually in a consultation phase with our stakeholders, asking to support us with a prioritization from the stakeholder point of view on which of the identified topics from their point of view is the more important one and should be highlighted in the strategic research agenda. This is open until 11th of October, so if you are maybe interested as well to share your point of view, you are more than welcome and invited to do so. And with that, I warmly thank you for your attention.